And repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
Keeping the palms joined. Palms down. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Just a quick reminder, a couple things here. If you do end up sneaking out in the middle and going to the restroom, please put your shoes on when you go into the bathroom. Public restrooms aren't clean. So they will be after because we have so many people who stick around and clean them, so that's fine. But it hasn't happened yet, so please just put your shoes on as you go into the restroom. Then you don't trek whatever is in there back in here. So thank you. You know, there's one of my favorite Einstein quotes says, can't solve the world's problems with the same mind that created it. You're familiar with that quote? And I heard that years ago, and of course my mind wanted to argue with that. And the more I learned about Buddhism and Buddhist practice and bringing it into my life, the more that quote just applies for so many reasons. And, you know, we deal with a lot of challenges, difficulties, struggle, chaos. Buddha called it dukkha, discomfort, dissatisfaction, angst, sadness, depression, all those fun, lovely words that some of us might deal with once in a while. And I don't know about you, but I know for me, when I started this practice, I was pretty good at tricking myself into well, I'm still going to do all this and then have kind of my Buddhist thing, and this will all work out fine, you know? And years went by where I was still trying to buy all the stuff and have all the money and do all the cool things and go to all the places that cause so much misery, and then do my Buddhist thing once in a while and think that everything was going to balance each other out. And I found myself still pretty miserable because it didn't really work that way. And not everybody has their own journey, their own path, their own choices, and I fully understand that. But from my own experience, it wasn't until I, in my own head, and this means different things to different people, said, I'm all in. Meaning I'm done trying to balance all the other things that I was doing and bring some little meditation Buddhist practice into my life, thinking that it was going to make a difference. Because it really wasn't. It was maybe keeping me at a steady misery and depression, but and maybe it wasn't huge ups and downs, but it definitely wasn't a free, peaceful journey, living my crazy life and going to a Buddhist temple. So for me, once I said, I just can't keep focusing on all the stuff and all the money and all the things and fixing this and fixing that and buying this and buying that. For me, once I got rid of all of the things that I thought were bringing me happiness, and I moved up next to the temple here 16 years ago down the street and humbled myself to live in a little 400 square foot apartment, which was not easy to do for a guy like me. my whole life started to get better. But I really had to unplug from so many of the things that I kept doing. And it didn't make sense to me for a while, like, well, I'm going to my Buddhist temple. I'm doing my meditation. I'm reading my stuff. How come I'm still angry and depressed? Because I wasn't really making any changes in my life. I was really just repeating the same behaviors, the same habits, but now I can talk about Buddhism. Cool. Now I could be in the cool talks and I could say Mahayana and Theravada, Pratitya Samutpata, dependent origination. I could say all these things. But I was still miserable. So I don't ever suggest that my journey is the way that you all should live your lives, because it's not. Everybody has their own journey, their own paths, and their own choices to make. But I bring this up from a very personal place to kind of challenge everybody to actually look, especially if you've been around here for a while, or if you're brand new, really, to look at yourself and say, okay, well, it's great that I go to this temple thing. It's great that I'm into this meditation Buddhist thing. But am I even changing the way I live my life? Because until you start doing that, not much changes, right? And before we sit, there's another Einstein quote. Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result is insanity. And I'm not calling you all insane. I'm just saying, if you think about those two quotes, you know, and it's okay that somebody other than the Buddha said something. I know everybody's like, I'm at a Buddhist temple. I want to hear what the Buddha said. And sitting here throwing out, you know, Einstein quotes. But there are smart people in this world other than the Buddha. Don't forget that. So we'll start with the meditation practice. A couple things to tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you. Right? Not going to float away. Not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice. You know, to ask yourself, is this working? Is this not working? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? We're just going to sit. We're going to breathe. You're going to hear sounds. Sounds inside the room. Sounds outside the room. This is life. Life is filled with chaos. And the practice of meditation is learning to get quiet and still within all the chaos. Don't judge this. Don't ask yourself, is this working? Is it not working? Okay, we're just going to sit and breathe. If you sit there waiting for some grand aha moments, you'll be pretty disappointed. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. If you're on the cushions, it helps often if you slide to the front third, pushing the stomach forward. Allows the back to straighten, shoulders are relaxed, hands can be on the knees or in the lap, whatever's comfortable. If you're on the chairs or benches, also trying to sit up straight, relaxing the shoulders. I'll guide us as we begin. We'll settle into a little bit of silence. And starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth open or closed. Start with taking 3 deep breaths. Slowly. And eventually, Settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Gently guide the attention, focus, to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice. Observing sensation of breath. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. Return turn attention, focus to the breath. Where's your mind? Keeping the mind alert. Aware of each sound. Each thought. Each physical sensation. Yet concerned with nothing but sitting, breathing. With the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle, know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. No one else to be. everything exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. As you slowly open the eyes, slowly begin to move. And most important, the practice of meditation is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, it's quiet, calm, still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, it's nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how you sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It's everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being, no different than anyone in this room, who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. What that means very simply for all of us, regardless of where you come from, what you believe in, where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens, more reactions. That's what we get every day. This practice is learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you respond to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to everything else that's happening throughout your days. So all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. This practice is not easy. It's not necessarily fun. It's not an escape as often people think it is. But it's free. Sitting, breathing, becoming aware of your thoughts, What you think, what you say, and what you do is the essence of this practice. The Buddhist teachings is not about anything outside of you. It's about what you bring into every moment of your life. It is not escaping to your meditation Buddhist place and then going back to all of your madness. It's bringing this mindset, calmness, clarity into everything you do. That's not easy. It's really not. But once we begin to recognize, really, for me, what I was talking about at the beginning of our time here, is that when we get up and you go back into your life and into your world, that's where the changes have to happen. If we keep going somewhere to think that that's going to solve and fix things, then we're always going to be running. Problems that occur in our lives are always going to be there. They're just going to change. Different people, different places, different things that bother us, upset us, challenge us. But all coming back to getting to recognize the nature of our own mind. And as I said, being aware of everything you think, everything you say, and everything you do, and then seeing how that impacts the world around you. So I think I'd rather just stop there and open up to questions. I always prefer to just address whatever's on your mind. Meditation, Buddhist practice, any questions you might have that you're sitting with, and we'll go from there. Yeah.
I was under the understanding that under Buddhism you don't do any worshiping towards Buddha. Yet when we come in here, you always have a little presentation.
Yes.
What is that?
I love how you call it a little presentation. That's so cute. I appreciate the question. It's a great question. It's asked, various ways often, or just thought about various ways often. Let me start with asking you a question. Where did you get the idea? As you said, you were under the impression, and I think if you use those words, you said you're under the impression that Buddhism isn't about worship. Who gave you that idea?
No one in particular, something I've just picked up and heard through the years.
Yeah. I would say you picked up a false education or knowledge. Buddhism is extremely devotional. You all just don't do it. It is a 2,500-year-old religious practice that is filled with worship. I'll explain this in a minute, so bear with me before you all run out of here feeling like you're somewhere else. Right? It's filled with ritual, with what looks like worship, with what is devotional practice, with offerings, with prayers, filled with that for over 2,000 years. Now, when Buddhism gets to the West, over the last 75 years, what does our culture often really dislike and afraid of that led many of you here? Everything I just said. So how is Buddhism introduced in the West? Well, we're just going to sit around and be a bunch of American Buddhists, talk about our problems and meditate and look at a Buddha statue and think everything's going to get better, right? That's the general flow of Buddhism in this country. And it works. It's actually the reason we started the Dharma Bum Temple, was to pull out a lot of what I call the cultural trappings and the barriers that I think hinder Western people to exploring the Buddhist teachings, right? It's a longer answer to your question, but it's very important, not just for you, but for anyone in here who's never heard me talk about this, is that when I started at the Taiwanese Buddhist temple 16 years ago, we were in robes, and we would bow, and we would chant, and we would do offerings, everything I just did, and I'll finish with that, explaining what that was, right? And that was very special to me. I did that for 2 or 3 years, then you spend a year in a monastery, you do that every single day, multiple times, you're surrounded by people who are doing what looks like religious worship practice. That practice has been around way longer than this stuff that we do here. But when we opened the Dharma Bum Temple, we did it because what I saw was what I call a revolving door. So let's say you all walked in here. There's, I don't know, 70, 80 of you here today. Let's say right when you walk in, I had you all put on a black robe hanging by the door. And as soon as you walked in, I had you all bow 3 times. And then I told you to come up here and make an offering and bow to the Buddha statue. And then I told you to chant in another language. What's the likelihood of you coming back next week? I'll take that as a 0. You can't all see the laugh on the smile on his face, but it's not happening, right? So we literally created the Dharma Bum Temple to remove all of that stuff from Buddhist teachings because it's not in many ways important. But ironically enough, for over 2,000 years, all over the world, it is absolutely important. So what I always suggest is the question of, and this might not be the direction you were going in, I'm just kind of rambling here for everybody, if I'm looking at you, is that what is it about those things potentially? Worship, ritual, culture, bowing, chanting, all that stuff that I just described, what is it within us that makes it so uncomfortable? Because it's not about Buddhism, Christianity, Catholicism, Judaism, right? Whether you're Muslim, pagan, or Latin, it's not about any of that stuff. As I often say, if I get asked to show hands in here, how many Buddhists are in here, I'd see maybe 2 hands, right? So we're not here to be Buddhist. We're not here to become Buddhist. I'm not here to make you all Buddhist, you know? But I am here to share what I see are beautiful Buddhist teachings and an endless appreciation for the 2,500 years of Buddhist practice that involves all that stuff, right? A common question is, people say, is Buddhism and I'll come back to the beginning, but I want to keep going here. A common question people say, is Buddhism a religion or a philosophy, right? It's both. However you look at it is totally up to you, right? By definition, a religion is a belief in a higher power. Well, that doesn't exist in the Buddhist teachings. This was 500 years before Christ. So the God and Christ that we refer to today didn't exist back then, right? They believed in Hindu gods and goddesses. And even the Buddha said, I'm just a human. I can't teach you about gods and goddesses. If you believe in them, you do. If you don't, you don't. That's totally up to you. But I'm here as a human to teach you, here's a way to live with loving kindness and compassion and joy. And whatever your religious, spiritual beliefs are, those are yours, right? The Buddha was just a good dude trying to get other people to be good people. I'm pretty sure a lot of religious leaders do the same thing, right? Now, if you go to a Buddhist temple right now in, say, Taiwan or Thailand or maybe Japan, or you go anywhere around here that has what I call cultural Buddhist temple, and you go to them and you say, this isn't a religion, this is a philosophy, that's kind of insulting. I'm not saying it would be insulted, but that would be like going to the Catholic Church on the corner and walking in there to the head priest or whoever's there and be like, yo, this stuff you're doing, it's not religion, it's philosophy. So however you want to look at it, whatever makes you comfortable with learning how to be nice to people, rock on. Whatever you want to call this Buddhism thing, and most people don't want to call it a religion because they have all this hang up internally about religion. That's your mess, right? So a lot of people, another phrase I love is that the Buddha himself wasn't Buddhist. He was just some dude who taught. And then Buddhism became Buddhism. So at the beginning, what I do for me, based on everything I just said, sharing Buddhist practice as a philosophy and way of life around the Dharma Bum Temple is most important. 100%. That's why we do this. But for me, as someone who got introduced in a very beautiful cultural practice with Buddhism, that means something to me. Like I'm coming into a formal, what I consider in my mind, in my heart, a formal ritual practice. So I'm going to treat it properly, and I'm going to do what I was trained to do, which is a half bow, 3 full bows, and then a half bow. And then I get to practice what the Buddha said is the greatest gift, which is to share the Dharma. So for me, it's a tremendous amount of respect and appreciation. Years ago, I used to say, when I asked people to join Palms, I used to say, if you choose to, please join Palms, kind of giving people the option. And then I realized, like, who am I to give people a choice? I'm just going to say join Palms. I'm looking that way anyways. And if people want to do it, you can. And if they don't, they don't. That's totally up to them. And I suggest you only do that if it means something to you. You know? So that's a, believe it or not, a short answer to your question. Great question. So important. Does that clarify some things?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for asking that. And the last thing I'll say on that, not just for you, but for everybody, is that when you bow to the Buddhist statue, without getting into the whole long-winded answer, you're not worshiping him, right? You're finding admiration, respect, appreciation for the Buddha who lived and died, the teachings, and the community. So when I bow, I'm not like bowing down to, it's another Western cultural thing. We hear the word bow down. Yeah, we don't like that. No, my ego won't bow. I'm above all of that, which I found for somebody like me who was so egotistical and arrogant and would never have thought of bowing down to anyone. You know what the most beautiful practice for me to do in Buddhism 16 years ago was to sit down and shut up and bow. Because that's what I needed to do for my ego, to cut through it. It was very humbling. But we're definitely not worshiping the Buddha in the way that we think of worship in a Western context. Yeah. Other questions on that or anything? Yeah.
You said if you asked, only a couple people would say they're Buddhist.
Yeah.
What is Buddhist?
The question was, he said, if I asked, only a couple people would say they're Buddhist. And the question was, what is a Buddhist? So my master used to say that you could shave your head and put on a robe and that doesn't make you a monk, right? Just kind of like my answer before, are there formal rituals and things like that to go through to actually take refuge or take precepts or things like that, that like people would say, well, I'm a Buddhist now because I've taken refuge? Sure. To the average person, do I think those things are really important? Not so much. Being Buddhist isn't about, someone asked the Dalai Lama years ago, does this country need more Buddhists? And he said, the world has enough Buddhists. This country just needs more people who are peaceful and happy. So I get it, especially for people who are new to Buddhism, this idea of like, I want to find peace, I want to be happy, I want to be Buddhist. Those aren't, like, you could be an angry, miserable, depressed, pissed off person and also be a Buddhist. Right? Again, I know that's not the nature of your question, not from conversation I've had with you, but I still think that's important, that just to become a Buddhist, my time in Taiwan, you see people driving taxis, they got Buddhists everywhere. That doesn't mean they do everything the Buddha did. Here you got a taxi or an Uber or whatever, and you got a cross. That doesn't mean that people here do everything Jesus did. So to be Buddhist is to carry that in your mind and in your heart, that you really want to work on the teachings and the practice and to embody that in body, speech, and mind. It's a practice and it's a way of life. And as you begin that practice and that way of life, if causes and conditions come together, one day you'll find yourself around a place that maybe is doing a refuge ceremony or a precept ceremony or something like that. And you're like, yeah, I want to do that. I want to take refuge. But to lead with that intention is not the purpose. Yeah, for sure. Welcome back. We missed you.
I gotta go now. Related to that, I was always curious, in the cultural Buddhist temple, is there a procedure for becoming a Buddhist?
Yes.
What is that?
It varies from culture to culture, but it really starts with in most cases, right, to my knowledge, a formal refuge ceremony where you formally buy a head master, a monk or a nun, an ordained Buddhist, right? And you have a refuge ceremony where you vow. It's a series of vows. And this also ties into follow-up your question. And you vow to take refuge in the triple gem, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, right? And you keep that as your life's long intention and aspiration. And technically, in the culture of Buddhist temples, you do a refuge ceremony, you get a Dharma name, and you can say, look at my certificate, I'm a Buddhist. And then you still have to get in your car and walk out that door and either be nice to people or treat them like crap, right?
Can I carry that one step further?
Yes.
Is there a difference between being ordained as a monk and a lay person?
Yes, there is.
Is it the same for the lay person?
Yes and no. So, and also the second thing I was going to say, which really is the response to that question is there's then what's called precepts. So it's funny because I posted these in the Dharma Bum stuff the last couple of days. I always laugh at we put a few guidelines up here about, wearing shoes in the bathroom or keeping all drinks outside, and everybody freaks out. I'm going to my Buddhist temple. Why can't I just be who I want? There were 227 to 311 precepts, guidelines. We would probably call them rules, but they're not rules. That the Buddha said, this is how we will live our lives. Now, he didn't sit down and make a list of rules. He saw that the Sangha, the community practitioners, as they came together, he saw things that would arise that would cause conflict within themselves or the community. And precepts came to be. In the Vinaya, which is the code of conduct, there's a whole, in the Pali Canon, there's a whole list of all the 227 to 311 precepts and the reason behind it that they were put in place. Some of them are severe, some of them are simple little things, right? But when you take, as a layperson, I'm going to come back to that in a second, as a layperson, you take refuge, and then the first thing you would do again is take a formal precept ceremony where you do the 5 precepts. Right? Now, I never forget, many of you know Ken St. Pierre. He was our first president here years ago. And we were doing Dharma Bum Life, and we had a monk came in, and we did a precept ceremony for Dharma Bum Life, right? And they all took the 5 precepts: no lying, no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, and no intoxicants, right? He takes all 5 precepts. 2 nights later, we show up and we're asking everybody how they are, and he says, I already broke all 5 of them. But his intention, his vow, was to be aware of those and to work on not doing them. Now, obviously, as a monk and nun, you take these precepts, you live by them. And the hope is that you have the wisdom to know that if you're not ready to live by these guidelines, then you shouldn't be the monk or the nun, right? So there are precepts. And that's one big difference with monks or nuns and lay people, is a series of precepts, as well as your living conditions, whether you're in a monastery, in a temple, just kind of roaming around free, things like that. I mean, they're actually free in the monastery and temple, but probably freer than we are. Because those precepts, that's what keeps your mind free. I always look at precepts. How many of you have never even heard of precepts like this? Is like brand new to a handful of you, right? I look at precepts as red lights, right? You get to a red light, Paul, do you have to stop? No. You couldn't go through it, right? I knew you'd be honest, right? So you can go through it. What can happen? Ticket, what else? Kill somebody, what else? Could get away with it too. Right? So all kinds of things could happen when we run a red light. Same thing with precepts. They're there protecting us, to protect us, to keep us safe. We can choose whether we want to follow them or not. Chances are, if we stop at the red light, less people will get harmed. Chances are, if we abide by these precepts, less people will get harmed. If we don't lie, if we don't kill, if we don't steal, if we don't have sexual misconduct, and we don't use intoxicants, then we're probably going to harm less people, including ourselves. Right? So, also with being a monk or nun is really a vow to kind of have a master, and you become a disciple of that master and you follow their teachings. Yeah. Good questions. Yeah. Go ahead, and then go ahead. Yeah, back.
So, a question about the life of the Buddha. He was a prince, and he didn't like, the life that he had, a princely life.
Yes.
Why would he stay in that environment and then practice and build, cultivate?
Why would he?
Why wouldn't he?
No, why wouldn't he stay?
Stay in that environment and basically transform himself.
Yeah.
And in a way, he left that life and
Yes.
created a new life for himself. But we could also call that escape.
We could, and a lot of people do, especially those who are stuck in their life and afraid to leave it. Not necessarily you, right? I've heard a lot of justifications around that specific teaching, right? We're very good at rationalizing and justifying what the Buddha did, and then we try to draw that back directly to our life. That's a mistake I think often people make in thinking, well, the Buddha did it this way, so I must do it this way. Most important is to recognize, and I'll talk about it specifically with the Buddha's life, But in your life, is your mind free? Is your heart free? Or do you feel trapped and stuck? And to understand that what the Buddha did was renounce, right? So renunciate path doesn't mean that you leave your life and go become a monk or nun and live in a temple. You can renounce things that are in your life right now that are causing you suffering. We just choose not to very often, right? Make sense so far? The Buddha's life specifically, yes, he was a prince, he had all the wealth, all the riches, all the everything, and he left that. Your question of why wouldn't he stay, you'd have to ask him, right? I can't answer that. But what I can tell you is obviously his journey to awakening required him to leave, right? Then he left for 6 years. He had what they call the awakening. And you know where he went back to? His family. The first nun was his aunt, his mother, right? Raised him. His mother died. When he was born, his mother died. About 7 days after he was born. So his aunt raised him, became his mother. And she was the first nun. So I can't tell you why he didn't stay there, but obviously he felt that he must go. And if you think about the life of the Buddha and the story, what's called the 4 sights, right? When he left for the first time, he snuck out. It actually happens over 4 times. But when he left, he saw an old person, he saw a sick person, he saw death, like a funeral procession, and he saw an ascetic, like a monk or nun, right? He realized, because and a lot of people I don't know if you knew this, his father sheltered him. Anytime anyone got old, they were kicked out of the palace. Anytime flowers started to die, they were torn out, right? Anytime anyone was sick, he got him away from Siddhartha, because he knew that his son had such a big heart that if he saw pain and suffering, he wouldn't want to become a king. He would want to be a compassionate being and not rule and kill people. So his father sheltered him for 29 years. So to me, one of the reasons he left was once he saw this, he said, I can't live a life anymore spoiled with all this wealth and all the riches, thinking everything is wonderful. Because for him, on the surface, it was. But then he saw a whole world out there that was suffering and said, I can't live like this when there's a world that suffers. So, again, you have to ask him. But you can break that down and say, well, how much of it was him escaping? And how much of it was him recognizing that he needed to see a world he never knew in order for him to overcome his suffering and then be able to teach that back. The last thing I'll say on that, which is really important, at that time of the Buddha, they didn't believe in just one life and then going to heaven or hell. They believed in endless rebirth, for the most part, until nirvana, but we don't have time for that right now. So what he was teaching wasn't just so he could live his one life peacefully and then be done. He knew that he would be reborn into a life of samsara and have to go through suffering all over again. And he said, I'm tired of watching the world suffer. I want to figure out how to help people with their suffering because they're all going to be reborn. And if I can help them awaken, then that's a good thing. So it's a lot laid into that. That's like an 8-hour discussion to get started. Yeah. Jim?
When the Korean Zen master was here, one of the funny remarks he made when he came in was he liked this temple because there were no clergy.
There were no clergy, yes.
What was the difference between monks and nuns, clergy, priests, and masters?
Yeah, that's a hard one to sum up. I mean, because every culture, if you're looking at Taiwanese Buddhism, Thailand Buddhism, Vietnamese Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism, Korean Buddhism, they're all layered differently. You have lay Buddhists, you have lay ordained Buddhists, you have monks and nuns. The difference, at least from the culture that I come from, monks and nuns and masters, someone who's a master means that they have been put in a position to have direct disciples. And, they call me abbot. But masters are just monks and nuns who are in charge, to put it in a way we understand it, right? And yeah, we built this temple always to not have the headmaster or nuns or monks or anyone. We bring them in as guests, and then we ask them to go. Because building a culture around here where you have a bunch of unenlightened people looking for somebody to save them, help them, and fix them can be very dangerous in a Western culture if you're not careful. So we're very clear on, yes, we don't have a master. We've worked, 13 years now to make sure that this temple can always live forever without anybody leading it. We're not there yet, but we're getting closer. Yeah, Al, and then,
In his life as a prince, wouldn't that be an ideal position to help people outside the walls then?
potentially, yes. If your intention, right, was pure. So again, philosophically, analytically, not enough time to break this down right now, but potentially yes, but I'll reference somebody else, King Ashoka, who was a very powerful ruler in India, murdered, slaughtered through war, thousands and thousands of people. And then one day on the battlefield, you can Google him, King Ashoka, right? One day on the battlefield, he was out there and you just saw countless bodies, bloody and dead. And he had this moment where he realized, I can't do this anymore. And he turned to Buddhist teachings. And we would not be sitting here today. Buddhism would have died. If it weren't for King Ashoka using his power as a king to then spread Buddhism throughout. So yes, absolutely correct. Obviously, Siddhartha at that time, those conditions weren't there. Right? But yes. I mean, if every nation had a Buddhist ruler and all they cared about was kindness and compassion for all beings, I'm thinking that'd be a pretty nice world. Last I checked, we're not there yet. But yes. So one more, I just want to kind of close with this thought. Somebody asked earlier coming in, we'll wrap up, a question I think really can apply to many people here. When you travel, how do you keep your practice going? And it makes it very difficult because you get in your routines of meditation at home or going to your weekly meditation class, Buddhist class, yoga class. You get in these routines, and then all of a sudden you pull yourself out of that routine, and you're on the road for like a week or 2 weeks, and all of a sudden everything's chaos. Anyone ever traveled for work recently? All right, who wants to play along? Anybody? Chuck, do you have a? Nope, I'm asking the questions. We're out of time here. When you're out traveling for work, do you have a work meeting to go to in the morning? Ever?
If we
Somebody else do this. Oh. All right. Do you ever have a meeting to go to?
Not a meeting, but I have like a routine, 4 days a week. The first thing I do in the morning is I meditate for 20 minutes.
All right, great. We're out of time. I don't have time for this. Go ahead.
And on the weekend, I start falling behind because I sleep in and my routine's all disturbed, so I kind of fall behind. So I'm like, oh yeah, let's go to the
Temple, because it's at 11. So if we were at 8 a.m., you wouldn't be here, is your point. Here's my thought. The first practice the Eightfold Path is correct view. You both tried, I appreciate it. But the challenge is when we're traveling for work, we have responsibilities and things we have to go to. Meetings, whatever it might be. Why do we go to those meetings when we're traveling for work?
It's your job.
It's our job. And what happens if we don't do our job?
Down the road.
You get fired. And what happens if you get fired? No money. Who said no money? Keep going. And what happens if you have no money? No food. Different life. What happens if you have no food? Suffering. So we actually go to our work meetings or whatever our responsibility is when we're traveling for work because we want money. And we think money gets us what we need to live. Now, our view about making sure that we do the meditation and yoga or whatever it might be when we're traveling, we don't view that as important as the money, even though we tell ourselves we might. When we begin to see that your spiritual path, no matter where you are, is way more important than your job, you'll put that as the same priority. When we travel for work and we have business meetings, whether you're local or not, you go to them. Because if you don't, you pay the consequence. And when we start to see that if we don't treat our own spiritual journey the same way, we pay the consequence. So it's really the view we have. That's the short answer.
That's a really quick
Yeah.
follow-up question. So if you're, even if you're, tired or you're sick or you're not, whatever is going on because of the circumstances of your work schedule, and you're like, well, I can sleep in 20 more minutes, or I don't feel like doing it. So is it, in this mindset, would it be like, no, do it anyway, like force yourself?
If you had a meeting on your work trip and you were tired and you didn't feel like going, would you go? Yes. Why? You have to. When you view what I'm talking about the same way, then you'll do it because you have to. Because if you don't, we become a mess. And then we lose our job anyways. So I'm going to close with that. We'll join palms. Another one of those ritual things of joining palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all be at peace. May all be free from suffering. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to Max in his time of healing, and his family and friends, and to Tana during her time of suffering. May they all be at peace. May we all be at peace and free from suffering.